In the 16th century Japan, a samurai could master a sword technique in 3 years that took normal students 15. They weren't more talented. They weren't training harder. They were using a learning framework so effective that modern neuroscience can't fully explain why it works. It's called Shuhari, and the military tried to classify it because it shouldn't be physiologically possible. What Shuhari actually is. Shuhari breaks down into three characters: shu, obey; ha, po, break; li, transcend. Most people translate this as learn, detach, transcend, and completely miss the psychological warfare happening at each stage. This isn't a learning method. It's a systematic attack on how your brain naturally wants to learn, and that's exactly why it works. Stage 1. Shu, the death of your ego. Shu means obey, but the real translation is destroy yourself. In traditional training, a student would repeat a single sword cut 10,000 times. Not 10,000 different techniques. One cut, 10,000 repetitions. Your brain hates this. When you repeat identical movements, your brain creates motor engrams, hardwired neural pathways that execute without conscious thought. But here's what makes Shu terrifying. You're not allowed to understand why you're doing it. Modern education teaches understanding first, then practice. Shuhari reverses this completely. You obey before you comprehend. The master says, cut at 45 degrees. You don't ask why, you don't question the angle, you don't innovate. You execute exactly as shown, even when your brain screams that there must be a better way. This creates cognitive surrender, the complete abandonment of intellectual resistance. Your ego, which wants to prove it's smart by improving things, gets starved to death. Most people fail Shu not because they can't perform the technique. They fail because they can't stop thinking. Here's the neuroscience. When you practice without intellectual interference, your brain allocates 100% of its processing power to motor learning. When you practice while analyzing and questioning, you're splitting cognitive resources. You learn slower because you're literally using half your brain. Elite warriors understood this instinctively. Modern science proved it in 2008 when researchers found that mindless repetition creates muscle memory 300% faster than analytical practice. Stage 2. Ha, strategic destruction. After 1 to 3 years in Shu, something strange happens. The technique becomes involuntary. You can execute it perfectly while thinking about something else, while exhausted, while injured. That's when Ha begins. Ha means break, but not randomly. You systematically break every rule you just spent years learning. The master who demanded perfect 45-degree cuts now tells you to cut at 40 degrees, 50 degrees, 30 degrees. The stance you drilled for 10,000 repetitions, widen it, narrow it, shift your weight. This seems contradictory until you understand what's actually happening in your brain. You're not unlearning, you're expanding. Each variation creates a new neural pathway that branches from the original engram. Think of it like a tree. Shu built an unbreakable trunk. Ha grows branches. But here's the critical part. You can only do this after the trunk is solid. If you try to create variations before mastering the foundation, you build weak branches connected to nothing. That's why self-taught martial artists plateau. They skip Shu entirely and go straight to Ha. They have 100 mediocre techniques instead of one perfect technique with 100 variations. Modern military research discovered this accidentally. In the 1980s, the U.S. Army tried teaching soldiers multiple rifle stances simultaneously for flexibility. Accuracy dropped 40%. When they switched to Shuhari, one perfect stance for 6 months, then variations, accuracy increased 60% above baseline. The Pentagon quietly classified the training manual. Ha is where you develop adaptability. You've internalized the fundamental truth so deeply that you can violate it intelligently. You're not breaking rules randomly. You're breaking them with complete understanding of the consequences. Stage 3. Re, the inhuman part. Re translates to transcend or separate, but the practical meaning is terrifying. You become the technique. There's no separation between you and the action. You don't execute a sword cut. You are the sword cut. Neuroscience has a name for this: flow state, or transient hypofrontality. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that self-reflects, doubts, hesitates, shuts down completely. Time perception warps. Conscious thought disappears. You're operating on pure instinct refined by 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. But Re goes beyond flow state. In Re, you start creating new techniques that didn't exist before, not through conscious invention, but through unconscious evolution. Your body solves problems your mind doesn't even recognize exist. Historical records document samurai in Re doing things that shouldn't be physically possible: predicting attacks before opponents moved, executing techniques with injured limbs that should be non-functional, improvising counters to styles they'd never seen. Western observers called it mysticism. It wasn't. It was neurology pushed to its absolute limit. Here's what's actually happening. After years in Shu and Ha, your brain has built such a comprehensive database of movements that your subconscious can pattern match and generate responses faster than conscious thought. You're running on a neural network with millions of trained connections. The opponent moves. Your body responds before your brain registers the attack. Modern athletes occasionally touch Rai. Muhammad Ali's impossible reaction speed. Michael Jordan's ability to improvise mid-air. Messi's supernatural ball control. They're not superhuman, they're in Rai. But they usually get there accidentally through raw talent and obsessive practice. Shuhari is the deliberate path. Why this method is forbidden. The method isn't literally forbidden, but there's a reason it's not mainstream. Shuhari requires something modern education systems can't provide: patience and ego death. Shu takes 1 to 3 years of mind-numbing repetition before you're allowed to innovate. Modern learners want to understand and express themselves immediately. YouTube tutorials teach 50 techniques in 10 minutes. You feel productive. You learn nothing permanent. The corporate world tried implementing Shuhari in the 1990s. Toyota still uses it for training engineers. 3 years as an apprentice before you're allowed to suggest improvements. It works spectacularly. But American companies abandoned it within months. Employees quit. They couldn't tolerate being treated like beginners. The military uses modified Shuhari, but can't publicize it because it contradicts everything modern education stands for. Obey without understanding sounds like brainwashing. Master one thing before learning another sounds inefficient, but the results are undeniable. The modern application. You don't need to become a samurai to use Shuhari. You need to accept 3 brutal truths. First, you're probably not a beginner. You're an amateur who skipped being a beginner. If you can't execute your field's fundamental skill perfectly, unconsciously, under stress, you're not ready for innovation. Go back to Shu. Second, boredom is the price of mastery. If practice isn't boring, you're not repeating enough. The resistance you feel to drilling basics isn't your brain telling you it's pointless. It's your ego dying. Let it. Third, speed comes from slowness. Samurai who spent 3 years on one cut learned the next cut in 3 weeks. The foundation accelerates everything that comes after, but you can't skip to week 3 of year 4. Here's the framework. Pick one fundamental skill in your field. 1. Not 3. Not 5. 1. Drill it daily for 6 months without variation. Don't innovate. Don't make it your own. Execute it exactly as experts demonstrate. Let your ego scream. Ignore it. After 6 months, if you can perform it perfectly while distracted, you've completed Shu. Now spend 3 months deliberately breaking it. Test variations, find boundaries, understand why the original worked, then stop thinking about it entirely. Just do your work. That's Re. You'll know you're there when you do things you didn't know you knew how to do. The uncomfortable truth. Shuhari works because it exploits how human neurology actually functions, not how we wish it functioned. We want learning to be fast, fun, and ego-affirming. Biology doesn't care what we want. The samurai who mastered techniques in 3 years weren't superhuman. They just accepted the process. Ego death through repetition, expansion through systematic variation, transcendence through unconscious integration. You can do this with anything: programming, writing, sales, surgery, music, but you won't, because Shu is boring, Ha feels like going backward, and Ri requires trusting a process that seems mystical. That's fine. Most people will keep learning the modern way, slowly, shallowly, temporarily. The few who embrace Shuhari will learn faster than seems possible, and won't be able to explain how. That's the method. That's why it was forbidden. That's why it works.